So today we're joined by two experts in this space. First of all, we have Craig Kaiser, who's the president of LandGate. And we also have Max Nova, who is the CEO of Natural Capital Exchange, and he'll be facilitating the majority of this conversation. So first, to get things going, I'm gonna hand things over to Craig, who will introduce LandGate and also give us a look at our new LandGate, or excuse me, our LandApp mobile application, something that many of the landowners on this call would really appreciate. So Craig, if you want to take it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the introduction, Rich. And for those of you joining us, welcome. I think you're going to be in for a nice treat here. We have Max Nova from NCX, incredibly knowledgeable individual when it comes to just land in general, but more specifically timberland, things like that. So as Rich said, we really encourage as much interaction, questions, things like that as possible. So as Max is going through his material, which is very in-depth, just an absolute great resource for you as landowners, and also the real estate folks out there, the land professionals out there listening. Leverage your time here with Max. Ask him questions. If you have questions, now is the time to reach out to him and get those asked. But quickly here, I'm just going to show you what LandApp is. We host these webinars every couple weeks, usually covering different topics. Sometimes we're talking about renewable energy, other times we're talking about data centers, traditional energy, and obviously today we're here to talk about carbon credits and specifically timber carbon credits. But LandApp is a very nice resource for landowners to come and get information completely for free. So LandApp, you can come to landapp.com, you can type in your address, and you can actually jump into looking at properties and getting some information straight away. So I can just click on a piece of property. What you're seeing here is the landowners and the property lines. For $6 a month, you can download our app. It's in the Google Store and the Apple Store. You get nationwide ownership information. So coast to coast, border to border, who owns what and what the outlines look like. Myself, all of my neighbors, most of the people I talk to, they love having this on their phone, being able to, they're driving around, looking at property, scouting, doing due diligence, and figuring out information about the property very quickly. So if I click on a piece of property, you get this for 174 million parcels across the United States, but we give a very granular breakdown of every single piece of property. So you click on a piece of property, it's going to break down for you relative values of that land. You can actually get a breakdown of what types of forest land you have on your property, types of water, pasture land, all of those different things. You can go through and look at different energy indexes. So from 0 to 100, how good is the property? So I can click on this solar energy portion there, and it'll actually start feeding me information back. So I can click on the buildable acreage. It's going to show me where I have exclusion zones, things like that, where I'm going to have property that's not necessarily conducive for that specific type of revenue generation. So it gives you a really good understanding of what's going on in the area. It's going to tell you how close you are to transmission lines and substations and things like that. There you can see the transmission line nearby. But it's just feeding you an enormous amount of information back very, very quickly, again, for every single parcel across the United States, whether you own it, whether you're wanting to buy it, just doing research on it. You're going to learn probably as much, if not more, than the property owner themselves, just by going through and looking at the property. On the other side of the equation there, you have the risk indexes. So this is going to tell you if there's any contamination, basically your phase 1 report, which costs a lot of money and time to get. We're essentially giving that to you free. There you can see if there's oil and gas contamination, industrial contamination, different metrics as far as what type of energy is being supplied to the parcel, whether you're going to have blackouts, susceptible to blackouts, things like that. And then some really nice information about the overall information on the parcel itself. And then again, a nice breakdown about what's going on with the parcel, different soil types, different tree types, what the species are, how many trees per acre you have of each different type, the different amenities you have, and property features there. So a lot of information. You can export that out very quickly into a report. So I can go and take a look at this, click the button, and boom, I have everything in a nice PDF to keep track of, if I want to put this in my portfolio, if I'm managing property, if I own a bunch of different properties, or I'm just trying to learn about my own, I have all of that information that's provided in the platform in this nice PDF. So, like I said, it's a really, really great resource for landowners to get information about their property. And then the last thing that landowners really enjoy using our platform for is they can go ahead and raise their hand if they're interested in getting their property out in front of folks like Max who work regularly with landowners to help them generate revenue from timber, carbon credits, things like that, or data center developers or solar developers, wind developers, oil and gas developers. All you have to do is click this create listing button, and it's going to go ahead and put you into a funnel where you can start going through. You can add photos. You completely manage this listing yourself. So you can put a description, photos. You can delete the listing whenever you wish. You can accept offers whenever you wish. There's no obligations, but there's zero cost to this. There is no listing fee and there is no commission. So it's a completely free listing service that a lot of landowners, thousands and thousands of them across the United States, have utilized for all different types of things. Water, energy, renewable energy, carbon credits, any type of thing you want to get, you want to start getting developers to look at your property and send you offers for leasing or purchasing the property. This is a way to do it, and you're kind of driving your own ship there. So again, that's, before we kick it over to Max, that's LandApp. Again, you can come here, type in your address, and the first property report is free. If you want nationwide access to all the data I just showed, again, it's $6 a month. And Michaela will put a link to those apps, those app stores in the chat, and feel free to hop in there and start scouting. But without further delay here, let me stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to kick it over to Max. And like I said, leverage your time with Max. If you have any type of question about trees, carbon credits, don't ask me, don't ask Rich. Max is your guy, and we're very happy to have you here, Max. So kick it over to you and take it away.
Great. Well, thanks for the intro, Craig. And yeah, thanks everybody for attending. We'll try to keep this lively here. And if you have any questions as we go, just feel free to pop them in, and Craig will keep an eye out for those, and we'll get your questions answered. All right. So is the screen share coming through okay?
We can see you.
Okay, perfect. Good stuff. Well, yeah. Hey, everybody. So my name is Max Nova. I'm the CEO and founder here at NCX, which is the Natural Capital Exchange. And today we're going to be talking about how to get the most value out of your forest land in particular, although happy to take some questions about other land cover types as well. Our primary focus will be on selling timber, which for most landowners tends to be the single biggest dollar driver for their property, other than straight up selling the land if you own timberland right now. And we'll also talk about carbon credits and sort of this timber versus carbon credit trade-off, and how smart landowners think about weighing which one is right for them and their land. So we'll dive right in to a quick background of NCX. So this is now, I think we're 15 years in working with forest owners all across the United States. There's 40,000 landowners on the NCX platform, and we've helped facilitate over $20 million of payments to landowners across the country, which we're really proud of. Our mission as a company is to help landowners participate confidently in these emerging natural capital markets and any other market that they have for their property, by giving them really powerful insights about the trade-offs that they face on their particular property, and figuring out what aligns with your goals as a landowner. So we're called the Natural Capital Exchange because our mission is to help land be fully valued for all the benefits that it provides. So yeah, in this talk, we'll mostly be talking about things like wood products and timber and things like forest carbon, but this of course also includes things like wildlife habitat or soil health, or reducing the risk of wildfire, and even some alternative energy things like solar energy. There's a lot of values that you have on your property. Some of these may be the reasons why you own that land in the first place, but every decision that you make as a landowner has implications for every single one of these things on your property, and navigating that and finding out what path is right for you as a landowner is often tricky, because there's a lot of different moving parts here. One tool that we found to be very powerful when we work with landowners to try to develop a management plan for their property is to think about sort of two distinct accounts that you have for your property. You have your bank account, right? And that's something that, you know, probably everybody on this call has, right? You can, when you sell things, you make money and that bank account number goes up. When you buy things, that number goes down. But then what a lot of landowners don't realize is that you also have a natural capital portfolio. So these are the values of all these different types of natural capital on your land, whether that's the quality of deer or turkey habitat that you have on that property, or the amount of carbon that you have stored, or the amount of standing timber that you have on that property. And any management decision that you make often has implications for both your natural capital portfolio and your bank account. And there's always trade-offs, right? Something that you do that's great for turkey habitat might actually reduce the amount of carbon that you have on the property. Or when you sell timber, your standing timber goes down in your natural capital portfolio, but the cash in your bank account goes up. You know, this can also go the other way, right? Like if you plant trees in your property, you're probably going to have to pay out of pocket for that. But then the timber and wildlife habitat in your natural capital portfolio goes up. So our job at NCX is to help you as a landowner make informed and confident decisions about all of these management possibilities that you have on your land, all of these different project developers and different projects and loggers and carbon developers and solar guys, and, you know, just trying to figure out how do you balance all of these options that you have to achieve your vision for your property. So let's start with timber, just because this is a existing market that's very mature in the United States. This is something that there's a $10 billion a year industry around. Thousands of landowners across the country sell their timber every single year. But there's some important things to note when you're thinking about doing what's often the single largest transaction you'll make in your lifetime of managing your property. So there's of course the revenue side of a timber harvest and trying to maximize the value you get out of that. But for many landowners, you don't own the property purely for financial reasons. Often when I talk with landowners, I find that they say things like, well, I just love being able to hunt on my property, or, you know, I'm trying to just do what's best for the land and improve the health of the forest and reduce the risk that bad things will happen, or I want to be able to pass this down to the next generation. And so finding ways to balance just the pure financial motivations with some of these other natural capital outcomes on the property is important. But one thing that's often surprising for landowners is that often cutting is actually good for some of these other outcomes that you want. So for example, putting in food plots or something for deer, often involves harvesting timber. Or, if you have a relatively young forest that's really, really dense, it's often very beneficial to go in and thin out every other tree in that forest so that the remaining trees can really thrive, or if you just have a forest that, nobody's been actively managing it for a long time, it's super old and overgrown, the structure of those trees isn't really good, sometimes it's best to just clear it off and start over fresh. But all of those are examples of potentially needing to do a timber harvest for non-strictly financial reasons. But of course, there's also the financial component, and all else being equal, as a landowner, the more money you can get when you do a timber harvest, the better. So we'll walk through just a high-level overview of the major steps of successfully completing a timber sale. There's figuring out what your timber's worth. There's doing all the sort of site work prep for the sale. There's actually marketing that sale and getting offers in for your timber. And then there's actually getting that contracted and overseeing the harvest operations and making sure everything's compliant with local, state, and local regulations there. So the first step is to assess your timber. If you're working with a forester, or if you know somebody that has harvested their timber before, you might have heard the term a timber cruise. And that's really just a forester or somebody going out in your woods and doing a statistical sample, measuring the sizes and species of trees at different areas of your property. And this is really important because from that timber cruise, that statistical sample, you can determine things like the timber volume you have, the species mix that you have, the quality of those trees. And that really matters. You can see in this diagram here on the right, there's a really important split when you're thinking about selling your timber. Small trees often get turned into pulp and paper, and bigger trees often get turned into saw timber, things like 2x4s that you build houses out of. And there's a huge value differential between these two products that can come off of your property. The saw timber is often worth 2x, 3x, 4x or more than the pulp and paper. And so this is also another important factor of determining when you cut, right? Like as those trees get bigger, often they sort of they cross over into these higher value product classes that can dramatically increase the value of your timberland. And this is something that, working with a forester, working with NCX, we can help you think about and understand when is the right time potentially to harvest your timber. There's also, of course, some seasonal and market fluctuations in terms of the prices for these different products that are important to understand. But it's worth really driving home this point of how important it is to get a good estimate of the value of your timber, because the absolute worst situation you can be in as a landowner when you're thinking about selling your timber is, somebody will knock on your door and they'll be like, "Oh, I noticed you had a couple trees out back there. I can, those are worth some money. I'll pay you $5,000." And you say, "Wow, $5,000," without knowing that it's worth, $100,000. And some of the saddest stories I've heard working with landowners are these moments where they had an opportunity for potentially the generational wealth, and they just gave their trees away because they didn't understand what they were worth. And you can avoid that situation, or at least seriously mitigate the risk of that happening to you by being an informed landowner and understanding the value of your timber, and making sure that you get a good price for it. So once you've decided that it's time to do a timber sale, you're ready to move forward with that transaction. Step one is actually to make sure that you mark out exactly on your property where that timber sale is going to happen. Even if you're doing the whole property, which is a little unusual, you need to make sure that you've marked where your neighbor's boundaries are, right? So that timber harvest doesn't cross over. If you're only doing part of your property or only certain trees, you need to go through and mark those. In fact, actually, foresters are some of the first users of paintball guns for marking trees in timber sales. Because if you've got certain trees that you really want to keep on the property, you got to make sure that everything is marked correctly. You also need to make sure if there's stream crossings or other environmental things going on, like rare species or wetlands, that's all handled in accordance with local regulations. And then, of course, you need to get all your paperwork together, the deeds, the maps, any past harvest records, or anything else that you're going to need for the contracting stage. Now, at this point, you've done the groundwork and you're ready to actually put your timber up for bid. Often landowners will work with a forester, and they'll put together sort of a package for your sale that has the forest measurements, an estimate of how much timber is out there, and they'll send that out to local log buyers, wood dealers, and mills, anybody that is buying timber in that area. This is a hugely important part of the process. And like we talked about earlier, you don't want just the first person to knock on your door and say, "Hey, I think those trees are worth some money." Yeah, that's not how you want to do this transaction. Just like when you would be selling your house, right? You wouldn't sell your house to the first person that knocks on your door. You'd run a process, you get multiple bids for your house, and that's how you guarantee that you're going to get the best price for your house. You do the same thing with timber. One thing that is a little bit different than compared to the process of selling your house is that there's two major flavors of doing timber sales. You have a lump sum sale and a pay as cut sale. A lump sum sale, this is actually sort of like when you sell your house, right? It's just one fixed amount all up front. Then the buyer goes out and they harvest the timber, and you're done. So that's a very simple, straightforward way of doing it. But of course, from the buyer side, there's actually some risk there, right? What if they overpay, or maybe they underpay and get a good deal, if their estimate of how much timber volume you actually had on your property is off. And so you'll often find that many timber buyers prefer to do pay as cut sales, where they just, every time they sell a truckload of logs to a mill, they get a receipt from the mill, and they pay you based on the actual volume that cuts out on that property. So it's safer from their perspective, but you really got to watch every single truckload in sales like that. You really don't want a truckload to go missing, because that could be thousands of dollars that you're missing out on as a landowner. So you do have to pay a lot of attention when you're doing a pay as cut sale. And so finally, once you've selected the winning bid on your property, you got to get all the contractual details right, the price, the payment schedule, the harvest methods, any excluded areas. You'll often want to do a performance bond with the logger where they have to put up some money where in case they damage the gates or the roads or anything, that's all handled in your contractual details. And of course, you need to make sure you're complying with state and local forestry regulations as you're doing all this. So that's a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces. This is why people often hire realtors when they're selling their house, right? This is actually what the profession of forestry is all about. And working with a professional forester is somebody that deals with timber sales all the time. They have a lot of local connections and they can help you run that sale and administer the harvest operations in a way that ensures that you're going to get the outcome that you want for your property and also run a clean, honest sale and get all the money that you're owed. Now at NCX, we're predominantly a technology company. One of the things that I'm excited to share, sort of a sneak preview on this call with you all, is some of the technology that we're building to help facilitate some of these timber sales. And so I'll just jump right into a quick little demo of some screenshots here just to show you what's coming for landowners. So if you're thinking about doing a timber sale, I'd love for you to reach out to me just individually after this call, and we can get you early access to this. But so if you're a landowner, you'll see all the different timber sales you may have running on your property. Each of those sales gets a custom page with a map, some information about the inventory on that property that you can then send out to loggers and other timber buyers in your area. We also have a network of those people that we can help send your property out to so that you get lots of bids. So in an ideal world, what happens is you get a bunch of bids for your property. You put together a compelling sale. Then you as the landowner choose the winning bid and you award the sale to the logger or the buyer that put in the bid that you like the best. And then at that point, we also have additional tools to monitor the load tickets from these log trucks as they sell the timber to the mill, make sure that you're getting paid on time and accurately as that sale goes on. And then this is just from the other side of the market. Whenever you put a timber sale up, that shows up to all the log buyers and timber buyers in your area, so that we try to get you as many bids as we can for your property, because that's the way that you're going to get the best price and the best deal for the timber on your property. So that's coming soon. Again, if you want early access to this, shoot me a quick email at max@ncx.com. We'd be happy to get you set up for that. Or if you're a forester that wants to use this for administering sales for your clients, would also love to talk with you about that. One final note here before we move on to the carbon stuff is there are some serious tax implications that you need to consider when you're doing a timber harvest. And so knowing your timber basis, if timber basis is a new word for you, then you need to make sure you really do a bit of research on that before you think about doing a timber sale. There's knowing whether your timber harvest is eligible for capital gains or ordinary income is a hugely important swing in your bottom line. And if you're not familiar with these areas, timbertax.org is a very, very helpful resource on this. Although, if you're working with a local forester or working with NCX, we can help you think through some of these issues as well. So I'll pause here maybe just for a second before we dive into the carbon stuff, see if anybody's got any questions on timber in particular before we start talking about how to think about timber relative to carbon.
Max, I'll ask you a question real quick. If I'm a landowner sitting at home, I have a lot of timber. Some of the stuff you just went through there, I hadn't maybe considered before, right? Like some of the logistical implications, like you said, tracking all the truckloads, things like that. And it sounds like, boy, this is a lot more work than just, hey, I'm going to go ahead and sell my timber.
Yep.
Is NCX's role almost like a manager for me as the landowner? Can I pick up the phone and call you? And is that part of what NCX does, is help manage the logistics of that timber harvest?
Exactly. And so we'll pair you up with a local forester and help make sure that whole process gets run smoothly. So yeah, and this isn't available in all areas yet. This is sort of an early access program, but anybody that's on this webinar, like I said, shoot me an email at max@ncx.com if you want to get in on sort of the early access version of this new program that we're spinning up.
A little plug there for NCX in Max. Again, I have no financial dog in this fight, but if you're sitting at home and you're listening to this and felt a little bit overwhelmed by all of the different implications by that timber harvest, that is why NCX exists, right? And like I said, that's why you need to leverage your time with Max. If you have questions like that, ask away. Either ask him now, or like Max said, go and send him an email. But that's what his company does. His company's there to help you through a lot of those more detailed things that might be a little bit intimidating for you. So,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead there, Max.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Yeah, and it's in a lot of respects, it's actually even more complicated than selling a house, right? And so it's like, if you didn't run your own house sale or your latest house purchase, right? If you leaned on some experts for help with that, you should really consider doing the same with your timber harvest. For many landowners, in fact, their timber is often worth more than their house. So it's a serious financial event in your life, and it's often well worth it to work with a professional forester. Start with NCX, and we can help get you pointed in the right direction on all this. Including actually, and that's a good segue into the carbon side of things, including like whether even the timber is the right move for you. One of the key trade-offs or other options that you have as a landowner are carbon projects, and whether timber or carbon is the right move for you partially depends on your goals, right? Like if you just want to have trees and you really don't want to cut down a bunch of your trees, like you might be willing actually to take a bit of a financial hit, but you could still potentially get paid with some of these carbon programs to keep your trees standing. But even on a pure financial basis, there's some cases where actually it just pencils out economically for you to keep your forest standing and get paid for the carbon, rather than cutting it and selling the timber. This ends up being a little bit of a complicated financial calculation, because you've got to do some net present value calculations and time value of money, just given how long it takes for these trees to grow and how long some of these carbon contracts are. All of that is stuff that we can help you with at NCX for your specific property as you're thinking about these economics. But the take home, what I'd love everybody on this call to understand, is that there is a real trade-off between timber and carbon. And there's financial elements of that, and there's also natural capital elements of that trade-off. And as a landowner, that's something that you need. A lot of landowners aren't even aware that there are other options out there other than just harvesting their timber. And so I'll walk through in the rest of this talk some of the details about how you can think about these carbon programs.
There's some questions that came in. Do you want to go ahead and field a couple questions about
let's do a couple questions, and then if I may punt them to later if they're covered by the slides, but let's take it.
So it looks like someone's asking about procurement, and they're talking about using pine needles or generating money from pine needles prior to harvesting. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, pine straw raking is one of the great sort of under the radar natural capital markets out there. It tends to be highly localized. There's the labor supply chain for pine straw raking in a lot of areas is colorful, to say the least. But it's pine straw is great for things like mulching and stuff, and so actually you can get pretty good prices for that. One of the trade-offs, though, of doing pine straw raking is you do have to have a bunch of other people on your property to actually rake up all the pine straw and deliver it. And then I've also heard of some truly bizarre pine straw heists where somebody will load up a semi-trailer full of pine straw, and then the trailer gets anyway. It's like pine straw is sort of a colorful, interesting market out there, but for some landowners, it actually is a great revenue stream. It's not going to be on the order of what you can make doing timber, but it'll certainly pay your property taxes in a lot of places.
Another one, Max, there was a question came in. Is there a typical minimum size or mix of hardwoods versus pines that makes kind of an ideal stand and can maximize their revenue? Or do you want do you want isolated species?
Yeah, so in the Southeast U.S., the king is loblolly pine. And it's a fast-growing, super commercially important species. Like if you go to Home Depot and buy 2x4s and you're in Georgia, like those are southern yellow pine, loblolly pine 2x4s. that you're dealing with. The institutional timberland owners tend to almost exclusively grow loblolly pine in the Southeast United States, just because the economics on it are pretty strong. Now, of course, in certain areas like hardwoods, like if you're in Western Pennsylvania and you've got some beautiful Pennsylvania hardwoods that you can sell at a premium to local furniture makers and stuff, right? Like that's a way better option. Yeah, and the right tree to plant in your geography, in your market, is going to always depend on all of these pretty local factors, but also some of these ecological, biological factors about how different species grow in different situations. But this is what the profession of forestry is all about. And that's one of the benefits of working with a professional forester is they'll be able to analyze your site and make recommendations about like, okay, well, based on your particular property, based on the markets that we expect to be in your area, 30 years from now when these trees are mature, 40 years from now when these trees are mature, this is what we think the right decision for you to make now is. And it's complicated because the timelines are often very long. There usually is significant upfront cost in doing these, in planting or thinning operations. And so I would highly recommend if you're not extremely comfortable with all of these different factors to talk with us at NCX and we'll get you pointed in the right direction.
One more before we jump over into carbon, Max. There was a question that came in, and can you give a high level of explanation of how does the timber values differ based on region? Appalachian region versus the Pacific Northwest versus the Rocky Mountains. How much of variability is there? Maybe can you give us some understanding where the high and low values are?
Yeah, a forester's favorite answer for everything is always it depends. And one of the two major factors that it depends on are going to be what markets do you have, right? Because if you got no mills in your area, I got bad news for you. Like, maybe you can like mulch it and sell it to Home Depot for like pennies on the dollar or something, right? But like you might be stuck. And a lot of landowners, as mills close down, like I feel like every week I'm reading about a new mill closing down somewhere in the United States. And that's a huge issue for landowners, because it means there's less markets available for the timber that you are producing, which means ultimately you're going to get lower prices and it's going to really limit your ability to do good forest management because there's just not going to be money to pay for it, right? But if you're in an area with strong markets, you got a couple different mills that you could send your timber to, then you're likely to get much better prices than if you only have a single buyer or no buyers at all. The other thing that's really going to affect the price that you get is are the products that can come out of your trees, right? Like if you got a bunch of scraggly little skinny trees that are, it's like those are going to get turned into pulp, like we talked about. But if you got big chunky trees that you can turn into 2x4s, or even telephone poles or stuff, then you get a much better price for those products. And so, I'm sorry to not be able to give like a tighter answer on that, but the answer is it really does depend on the products that you're having come off of your tree and the markets for those products in your area. And there can be an extremely wide variability from like $0 all the way up to like, some of these Amish guys in Western Pennsylvania will pay you $1,000 for a single tree, right? That they can turn into, a beautiful hardwood table. Or a cherry, rocking chair, or whatever, right? Like it just really depends on your local markets.
There's several more questions about timber in here, and we'll try to, if we don't get your answers or your questions answered live, we will follow up in an email or Max will follow up. So continue to ask questions, but I do want to allow you enough time, Max, to get into the carbon side of it as well. So let's kind of wait and see how much we have at the end.
Yeah. I'll do the speed run version of the carbon stuff, and we can dive into it deeper in the questions if people really want to get into it. But the big take home, like I said, is there is a real carbon versus timber trade-off, and as an informed landowner, you should know what that trade-off is and what your best alternative is to timber or to carbon in any situation, because that's just as a rational manager of your natural capital portfolio, you need to know that information. Yeah, are you even eligible for carbon projects? You can look on LandGate, you can look on NCX. We both, I think, have pretty robust ways of assessing your eligibility depending on your geography, the land cover type, the acreage minimums that you have on your property. There's a couple different kinds of carbon programs that I would broadly break into. Don't cut down trees that are already there. Plant new trees. Don't build don't turn your forest into a subdivision. And then there are some soil carbon projects where actually, like, you might be a little bit surprised to know that most of the carbon in a forest is not in the trees, but is actually in the soil. And so there's some different carbon programs that'll pay you for some of your soil carbon outcomes as well. In general, as a landowner, there's two major flavors of how you get paid for these projects. One is, they'll just say like, oh yeah, I'll pay you, $15 an acre a year. Say, that's a per acre lease. The other flavor of this is they say, I will create carbon credits off of your property. I'm going to try to sell those carbon credits to somebody. And when I sell them, we'll split them, 50-50 or 80-20 or, whatever the split is. This is a really important decision as a landowner, which one of these you choose to do. Some programs are, they're only per acre leases, or some are only revenue share. Some will let you choose between them. One thing that's so important here is that there are serious risks associated with the revenue share of credit sales. There's potentially more upside too, right? Like if the price of carbon is really good or something, right? But there's just different risk profiles on each of these two options. And so you need to know yourself as a landowner what risk profile you have and choose accordingly. This is an image that I wanted to put up just because a lot of landowners will ask, like, well, how many carbon credits do I have? Where does that number even come from? And so the super brief version of this is that the carbon credits that you get are a function of the carbon stock that you have minus the carbon baseline. So the carbon stock is just like how much carbon is in the trees in the forest, right? Like if we actually weighed all your trees, how much carbon would there be in there? And then the baseline is it's sort of a complicated thing. It's supposed to be an estimate of like, well, how much, what would your business as usual management of your forest be over time? This is a very complicated issue. A lot of expert disagreement on this, on what's a good baseline or a bad baseline. But as a landowner, the thing that you need to know is your property will be assessed, and according to whatever carbon project methodology there is, a baseline will be assigned to your property. And the amount of carbon credits you get is the difference between the actual carbon that you have in your trees and the baseline. And so this is a really common misunderstanding that a lot of landowners have, is they think they're just getting paid for how much carbon I have in my trees. And that's not right. That's your carbon stock that you have, but you don't get paid for your full carbon stock. You are only getting paid for the carbon you have above the baseline. And so that's what this graphic is showing here, right? Is that you have your baseline here, you've got your carbon stock here, and then you have to hold that for whatever the duration of that contract is, whether that's 20 years or 40 years or 100 years. There's a bunch of different timelines potentially in these carbon projects. And as a landowner, right, like your job is to make sure that you maintain that carbon stock over the baseline for the full period of that project. But there's risks, right? Like this is a very, very long-term contract, right? Like your mortgage, right? Like if you have a 30-year mortgage, that's a long-term contract. Your mortgage lender makes you buy home insurance when you have a mortgage, because there's weird things that can happen over a decades-long time period with your house, and just the same with your forest. And so just a quick overview of some of the risks that you face as a landowner in these projects. There are risks to your carbon stock, right? Like if there's a fire, suddenly your forest burns down, you got a lot less carbon in your forest, right? And that's a risk. And you need to understand in whatever program you're in, well, is that, if a forest fire happens, or if pine beetles come in, or even if timber theft happens, somebody comes in and steals some of your timber, do you have to pay penalties? Are you liable for the difference? How does that affect your bottom line as a landowner? So that's, that's on the stock side of things. There's also risks on the baseline side of things, right? Like this is a number that you have no control over as a landowner, and it's just assigned to you. And one of the things that you'll notice in some of these programs is they use what's called a dynamic baseline, which means every 5 years or so, you get assigned a new baseline. Well, what if the mill shuts down in your area? Suddenly there's no demand for the timber anymore, and that baseline changes, right? Or the other supply demand dynamics in your region change. That baseline can change, and suddenly you can have way fewer carbon credits than you thought you were going to have. And as a landowner, you really need to understand that risk. And like, are you on the hook if that happens? Is the project developer on the hook? Is the buyer on the hook? Like, who's bearing that risk of that baseline shifting? Because it can have dramatic implications for how many carbon credits are actually generated from your property, and downstream how much money you actually make from your carbon project on your property. So we've talked about the stock risk. We've talked about the baseline risk. There's of course also price risk if you're doing a revenue share agreement on these carbon projects, right? Like, what if the price of carbon goes down, right? If instead of $20 a ton, what if it's $2 a ton, right? Suddenly you're making a lot less money. Although, like maybe the price goes to the moon, right? Maybe a carbon credit's worth $100. But yeah, that's a risk that you need to be aware of as a landowner. And then the final risk is the counterparty risk. There's a lot, all these carbon project developers tend to be pretty new companies. They're signing contracts that are, multiples. It's a 40-year contract is about, 40 years longer than a lot of these companies have been in business, right? And so, unless you're getting all that money up front, you also need to consider some of the risk that, like, well, what if this project developer isn't around by the end of my contract, right? Like, as the landowner, you probably plan to keep this land for a long time. You're going to be around, but is the counter, is this project developer also going to be around? It's not always a guaranteed thing. So these are some of the key risks that we always advise landowners to take very seriously when they're considering enrolling in one of these carbon projects. But for some landowners, it really pencils out and it's the right fit, and some landowners it isn't, right? But our job at NCX isn't to necessarily be in favor of one thing or the other. We just want to make sure that landowners have all the information that you need to make an informed and confident decision about your land. So you can find us at ncx.com, shoot us an email at landowners@ncx.com, or you can email me directly at max@ncx.com. We'd be happy to go into more details on any of this. But Craig, sounds like we got a couple more questions in here, maybe?
Yeah, we do. We have some more, and like I said, feel free to keep asking questions as we go through this. And I'll just kind of rapid fire you here, Max. It's like Andrew had a question here. Is there an optimum size for utility poles, or can trees become too large or too tall?
Yeah, so you definitely can get trees too large. It's very unusual for that to happen in like the Southeast. It's more common for that to happen in like the Pacific Northwest, where you have some real monsters, right? But like at a certain point, there is a limit to like what a mill will even accept. And again, this just depends on your local area, but there is a ceiling on like how big a tree the mill will accept.
All right. Question just came in. What about at what acreage does it make sense to focus on timber only versus timber and carbon?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the right way to answer the question, because my initial reaction is like, well, I think every landowner should always be looking at all their options. And so you should always be considering carbon. You should always be considering timber, right? Because it's price really matters in these things, right? Like if you're in a garbage timber market and the carbon price that you can get is really high, I'd be like, oh, like maybe you should consider carbon, right? Or like if timber is really hot and the carbon is in the toilet, I'd be like, well, timber is probably going to be the right move. Now, of course, it all depends, right? Like, because none of these decisions is made in a vacuum, right? Any forest management decision you have is going to have implications for everything else in your natural capital portfolio too, right? Like your decision to harvest timber isn't just a decision to harvest timber, right? It's a decision that also has impacts on the turkey habitat in your area, the neotropical migratory songbird habitat, and the soil health, and all these things that are going to have repercussions for decades in the future for your property. And so even if the prices are good, you may not be willing to make some of those trade-offs. You say like, listen, I only have, the next 15 years to walk these woods with my grandkids, and you couldn't pay me enough money to cut that down. Well, unless you were going to pay me $1 million, then maybe I'd think about it, right? But, again, like that's, I think landowners should always be considering all available options, but it can be overwhelming, right? And that's what, LandGate's a great place to start to even see what your options are. And then like when you're really trying to get down to the brass tacks on like, well, what is right for me and my land? Like, how do I actually make this happen? How do I make sure I don't get screwed in a timber sale or any of these things, right? Like that's where at NCX, that's our prime focus as a company, and we'd be happy to help you.
And anything that you all post on LandGate, any listings you create on LandGate goes in front of NCX. So anything that goes out there, it goes in front of Max and his team. And if we see it and we think it's fit for NCX, obviously we send the listing over there as well. But another question came in here, Max. Theoretically, if you had a very large parcel, could you do both there? Could you go ahead and harvest the timber on a portion of it and then also get carbon credits on another portion? That might be like a row crop or something else.
Yeah. And it's all a actually let me pull up this picture again, because they're not mutually exclusive, although there is often a trade-off between these things. And so, for example, in this initial diagram we're showing here, right, where your carbon credit is the difference between like your carbon stock and your baseline. You don't have to sell all of these carbon credits, right? You could only sell like this many carbon credits, and then you can harvest, above that, as long as you're maintaining the stock above the baseline that's required by the carbon project. Many programs will let you continue to do timber harvesting, especially, because the people running these programs, they want to store more carbon, but they also realize that like, well, sometimes for forest health reasons, like you do need to go and thin out some of these trees, right? So that they're less susceptible to things like pine beetle or fire or whatever, right? And so they're not mutually exclusive, right? But like every additional unit of timber that you want to harvest is, a unit of carbon that you're not going to be able to sell, right? And so you should just understand sort of at the margin what the trade-off is. Now I will say, like, some carbon programs are very particular about making sure you enroll the entire property. Some will let you only enroll part of the property. One of the games sometimes that people play in carbon stuff is they're like, okay, I've got 2 big chunks of land and I know I want to harvest one of them, but like I'll enroll this one in carbon and then I'll harvest this one, right? And then like nothing has actually changed, right? Like the carbon program did not actually reduce the amount of timber harvest that you were doing, right? You were just sort of playing the shell game here, and the carbon guys obviously like don't really want to encourage that kind of behavior. Like as landowners, we shouldn't really want to do that either, because like it ends up poisoning the market, right? And this is part of the reason actually why carbon prices are not doing so great right now, is because there has been a lot of sort of gaming and bad behavior with some of these projects.
Jake had a question. Looks like he's a land professional, deals with buying and selling of real estate. And he says a lot of times his clients will want to use the timber value for like a closing costs or some sort of down payment while they're purchasing the property. But he said he's finding that difficult to navigate the logistics of that, of being able to have the cash at the time of the closing, or does that only come when the timber is harvested? Is there some sort of loan program, like maybe a short-term loan program out there where they could leverage that? But I'll kick that over to you. That was Jake's question.
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of room for creativity in some of this timber finance stuff. Very few banks will allow you to use timber as collateral. It's actually shocking to me how illiquid a lot of times timber is as an asset. And I sort of get it from the bank's perspective, right? Because like there's a lot of things that go into doing a timber sale, right? It's not a super liquid asset generally, which makes the banks a little squeamish against lending against it. There is an instrument called a timber lease where you actually sell the harvest rights to your timber to somebody else. And that actually, in the situation you're talking about, may be a reasonable way to, before the land transaction even occur. There may be ways of structuring it. I'd actually be happy to talk with you about this. This is something that we think a lot about at NCX, is increasing the liquidity of timber as an asset class. Because like the reality is a lot of landowners, some of them are in the situation you're in, right, where they're trying to buy some land and finance it with some of the sale of the timber. Other landowners just have a forest that like needs work done, right? But like the payoff for doing that work is they're going to have a great forest, but they're going to have a great forest 20 years from now, right? And so like, how do they get that cash now to be able to pay to do some of these management operations now? You know, that it's going to create a lot of value, but we got to move that money around in time to actually make this all pencil out. I think there's a lot of room for some creative solutions there, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about that.
We'll go ahead and we got a few minutes left here. I'll try to get through some ones that I think we can get through quickly. We get this all the time. Every time we talk about carbon credits on these webinars, Max. Looks like Paul has a question here. Can you give us a range, low to high prices? What for the carbon credits you're talking about here? What kind of ranges are they talking about? Like, do you think that they could expect here from like a dollar per acre value?
Yeah, you know, it does vary program to program. You can get the latest information on ncx.com about like each particular program. You know, and some of it too depends on whether you accept a lump sum payment or whether you do a revenue share, right? Like if you do a revenue share, suddenly like, well, what price is that? I don't know. You know, like you're going to find out like if and when those carbon credits actually get sold. I would say it's fair to say like on the order of like tens of dollars a year generally is sort of about ballpark for a lot of these, but there's a range. And again, it's going to depend on where your baseline comes in and where your stock comes in, right? Because that's going to determine how many carbon credits you have, right? Like there's some properties that like there's just like not a lot of carbon out there. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you don't get any offers for the carbon on your property. And some where, you know, you're loaded up. So it's going
Max, this kind of what you just said there kind of inversely answers a couple of the other questions about acreage sizes. How much acres do you need for carbon credits? And you just gave us a range there, you know, tens of dollars per acre. It kind of gets down to a logistical, like, is it worth doing on a certain size of a property, right? Do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yeah, sure. And a lot of these programs do have acreage minimums. You know, it's usually somewhere in the ballpark of like 40 acres or 20 acres, you know, and in fact, you know, this is a thing that you'll run into too when you're trying to do a timber harvest, right? Like if you got less than 20 acres, you know, you can't even get a logger to pick up the phone for you most of the time. You know, it's just too small. It's not going to pencil out. They've got too much fixed cost in like setting up on your site and all that to actually make it pencil out to do a timber harvest on your property. This is actually one of the things that we're really excited about at NCX as landowner advocates, right? Is trying to help increase landowner participation and confidence in these markets is, you know, because we're starting to have so many landowners on NCX. This isn't out yet, right? But like if you want sort of early access to some of this in certain places, especially in the Southeast United States, we're starting to get to a critical mass of landowners in certain counties where landowners are saying like, oh, you know, like, so I actually need to get a timber harvest done or a thinning done, but like I just can't get anybody to pick up the phone because I'm too small. One of the things that we're doing at NCX is starting to aggregate landowners almost in like a little landowner co-op in particular counties to get above the acreage threshold to be able to do things like a timber sale or participate in a carbon project if, you know, individually people are below that acreage minimum, but in aggregate they could be, right? And so that's just one of the things that we're trying to do to expand market access for landowners.
Okay, one more question before we wrap it up here. Question that everyone gets. NCX services, are they based on commission or are they a flat fee? How do you guys get paid?
Yeah. So we have a membership for landowners where you can go to ncx.com and it's, I think, like $10 a month where you get access to all of this information about your land. When it comes to actually doing things on your property, right? Like we try to make it very accessible to just like learn the basics, put together a plan, figure out what's going to be right for you in your land. But when it comes time to like say, do a timber sale, right? You know, or apply to these government programs or something, stuff that takes real work, we do end up charging that on a per, you know, case by case basis for those things. Just, yeah. And again, it all depends on the size of your property and how complicated these things are, right? But we really view our job as, you know, make it as easy as possible for as many landowners to, you know, at least get oriented to what's going to make sense for them in their land. And then when they're ready to act, then we're there to be the easy button. You know, it's not free, right? Like, I mean, we're a business, we got to make money and stuff, but we try to, you know, just be as transparent and straightforward with landowners as we can with all that.
Okay. Well, that about wraps us up. Thank you, Max. Rich, do you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Craig, for the very helpful information. And as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, we will be providing a link to this recording as well as contact information. So, feel free to reach out to Max directly or ourselves here at LandGate if we can answer any questions, particularly around the LandApp application. Thanks a bunch for attending. We really appreciate it. And all of you have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye now.